Have you ever wondered what really happens when paradise turns into pure terror? What if your dream vacation became your worst nightmare? Tonight on Mr. Nightveil, we're diving into 10 cruise ship horror stories that will make you question ever stepping foot on a ship. These stories are 100% real. Only names and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. Before we begin, drop your location and what time you're watching this in the comments below. Let's start this nightmare together. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. My name is James, and I'm about to tell you something that still keeps me awake at night, 2 years later. What I witnessed aboard that cruise ship defies every logical explanation. And even now, sitting in my small apartment in Wisconsin, I can't shake the feeling that I failed my best friend in the most catastrophic way possible. I was 28 years old when everything changed. I'd just gotten promoted to senior mechanical engineer at my firm, and my college roommate Devin convinced me to celebrate with a week-long Caribbean cruise. It would be my first time on a ship, my first time seeing the open ocean beyond the shore. Devin had cruised twice before and kept saying, "Trust me, you'll love it. The freedom, the food, the endless horizon. It's paradise." We booked a 7-day Royal Caribbean voyage departing from Miami. The ship was massive, a floating city with capacity for over 3,000 passengers. When we boarded on that sunny Saturday afternoon, I was overwhelmed by the sheer luxury of it all. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff in crisp white uniforms greeting us at every turn. Our cabin was on deck 9, mid-ship with an ocean view that stretched endlessly toward the blue horizon. Devin slapped me on the back and said, "See, this is living." The first 2 days were exactly what Devin promised. We attended pool parties where the music pulsed and strangers became instant friends. We went on shore excursions to pristine beaches with water so clear you could see your feet on the sand below. The ship's atmosphere was intoxicating. Everyone seemed happy, relaxed, freed from whatever stress waited for them back home. Devin and I spent evenings at the casino, ate at different restaurants each night, and stayed up late watching movies on the cabin TV. But something was wrong, and I noticed it on the 3rd night. Devin and I were walking back from the late-night buffet when I noticed the security cameras. Or rather, I noticed where they weren't. Most corridors had them positioned at regular intervals, their little red lights blinking steadily. But when we accidentally took a wrong turn and ended up near a crew-only area on deck 12, I realized there were no cameras in that section at all. The corridor looked identical to passenger areas, same carpeting, same lighting, but not a single camera in sight. When I mentioned it to Devin, he shrugged. Probably just haven't installed them yet. Ship's only 2 years old. I didn't think much of it then. I wish I had. Night 4 started like all the others. Devin and I hit the ship's main nightclub around 10 p.m. The place was packed, the DJ was incredible, and the energy was electric. We danced, we drank, we laughed with a group of girls from Tennessee who were celebrating a bachelorette party. Around midnight, Devin said he was exhausted and headed back to the cabin. I stayed, riding the high of the music and the crowd. I remember checking my phone at 1:47 a.m. and thinking I'd head back soon. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold, but I didn't understand why at the time. I saw Devin, or at least I thought I did. He was across the dance floor near the exit, but he wasn't alone. He was talking to someone in a crew uniform, a man I didn't recognize. Devin looked upset, agitated like he was arguing. I started pushing through the crowd toward him, but by the time I got to that side of the club, both of them were gone. I figured maybe Devin had come back looking for me. got into some minor dispute with a crew member about re-entry or something trivial. I went back to dancing. That was my mistake. That was the moment I should have followed him. I returned to our cabin at 2:15 a.m. Devon's bed was empty, still perfectly made. His phone sat charging on the nightstand. His wallet was on the desk. I assumed he'd gone to the bathroom or maybe stepped out on the balcony. I was exhausted and slightly drunk, so I collapsed into my bed and fell asleep within minutes. When I woke up at 7:30 a.m., Devon's bed was still untouched. His phone hadn't moved. His wallet sat in the exact same position. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. We'd planned to meet for breakfast at 8 a.m. to watch the ship dock at St. Thomas. Devon never missed breakfast. He was obsessive about routine. Have you ever felt the moment when everything changes? When your entire world shifts and you know nothing will ever be the same? I checked the bathroom. Empty. I checked the balcony. Empty. I threw on clothes and ran through the ship's corridors, checking the breakfast buffet, the pool deck, the fitness center, anywhere Devon might be. Nothing. At 9:45 a.m., I went to the ship's information desk and said my friend was missing. The woman behind the counter smiled politely and said, "Sir, I'm sure he's just somewhere on the ship. It's very large. Give it some time." But I knew. Deep in my gut, I knew something terrible had happened. By 10 a.m., when Devon still hadn't responded to the 3 pages over the ship's PA system, I demanded to speak to security. They took me to a small office where a man in a dark uniform listened to my story with an expression I can only describe as practiced boredom. He assured me they'd look into it, but reminded me that adults sometimes want privacy, that maybe Devon had met someone and was spending time with them. "His phone and wallet are in the cabin," I said, my voice rising. "He wouldn't go anywhere without those." The security officer's expression finally changed. He picked up his radio and spoke quickly in a language I didn't understand. What happened next felt like a nightmare in slow motion. They reviewed CCTV footage from the nightclub. There I was, dancing like an idiot while my best friend was in danger. The footage showed Devon leaving the club at 12:53 a.m., 40 minutes after he'd told me he was leaving. Why had he come back? Had he been looking for me? Then they showed me footage that still haunts every dream I have. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. The camera was positioned near Deck 12, that same area where I'd noticed the missing security cameras. Devon appeared in frame, walking quickly, looking over his shoulder. He was on his phone, clearly distressed. Then a figure in a crew uniform entered the frame, the same person I'd seen him arguing with in the club. They spoke for maybe 30 seconds. Devon shook his head repeatedly, backing away. Then both of them walked toward the restricted crew area. And that's where the footage ended. No cameras covered that section. Devon vanished into a blind spot and never came back. The ship's security conducted what they called a thorough search. But I watched them. They only checked public areas, restaurants, theaters, pools. They didn't search crew quarters. They didn't search storage areas. When I demanded they search the entire ship, I was told it would disturb the guests, and that their procedures were industry standard. By noon, the FBI had been notified, but we were already 200 miles from our last position. The Coast Guard launched a search that lasted 13 hours, covering hundreds of square miles of Caribbean waters. They found nothing, not a trace, not a single piece of evidence that Devon had ever existed. And here's what made it worse, what makes it unforgivable. The ship didn't stop. We didn't turn around. The captain made a brief announcement about a passenger incident and asked everyone to check their cabins and report any concerns. But the shows continued. The buffets stayed open. The music played on. Most passengers had no idea someone had vanished in the night. They were too busy enjoying their paradise vacation. I was quarantined to my cabin and questioned repeatedly by ship security and later by FBI agents when we docked in San Juan. They took my phone, my laptop, every piece of evidence I had. They asked me the same questions over and over. Had Devon seemed depressed? Had we been fighting? Was there any reason he might want to disappear? He didn't disappear, I kept saying. Something happened to him. That crew member, who was he? Why aren't you finding him? They claimed they'd identified and questioned the crew member from the footage. He said Devon had asked him for directions and then walked away. The crew member returned to his duties. End of story. When I demanded to speak to this crew member myself, I was told that wasn't possible, due to legal reasons. 3 days later, I was forced to disembark in Fort Lauderdale. Without Devon, without answers, without any idea what happened to my best friend in those missing hours between 3:47 a.m. and sunrise. The FBI investigation continued for 3 months before it was officially closed. Their conclusion? Devon was assumed to have gone overboard, though no one could explain how or why. No witnesses, no evidence, no body, just gone. It's been 2 years, and I still can't accept it. Devon's family is still fighting for answers. They've hired private investigators, filed lawsuits, contacted congressmen. But cruise ships operate in international waters, and the laws are murky at best. The ship's registry was in Panama. The incident happened in the Caribbean. American jurisdiction is complicated. Every lawyer they've consulted says the same thing. It's nearly impossible to hold cruise lines accountable for passenger disappearances. I've done my own research. I've learned that an average of 20 people disappear from cruise ships every year. Most cases are closed as assumed overboard, with little investigation. I've read about other passengers who vanished in areas with no camera coverage. I've read about crew members who are rarely investigated, who disappear back to their home countries before authorities can question them properly. I can't look at the ocean anymore. I live 100 miles from any coastline now, but sometimes I still wake up panicking, seeing that grainy CCTV footage of Devon walking into darkness. I see his face looking over his shoulder, scared, knowing something was wrong. And I wasn't there. I was dancing to some forgettable song while my best friend walked toward whatever nightmare was waiting for him in that unmonitored corridor. His mother calls me sometimes. She asks the same questions I ask myself every day. What did that crew member want? Why did Devon go to that restricted area? What happened in those missing hours? Where is her son? I don't have answers. All I have is guilt and rage, and the knowledge that somewhere on that ship, in some corner that cameras couldn't see, my best friend vanished into thin air, and nobody who could have helped him seems to care. The ocean took Devon, or maybe something worse did. Either way, I'll never know. And that's a horror I'll carry for the rest of my life. My name is Linda, and I'm 54 years old. I teach 3rd grade in a small town in North Carolina, and I've always believed in living a healthy life. I walk 3 miles every morning, eat clean, and have never had a single heart problem. Not even high blood pressure. My annual checkups were always perfect. So when my husband Tom surprised me with a cruise to Australia's Whitsundays for our 25th wedding anniversary, I couldn't wait. Our 2 adult children, Emma and Christopher, would join us for what was supposed to be the perfect family celebration. We boarded the Carnival cruise ship in Brisbane on a warm Saturday morning. The ship was beautiful. Elegant dining rooms, sparkling pools, live music drifting through the corridors. Our cabin was on deck 7, an interior room without windows, but we didn't care. We planned to spend most of our time exploring the ship and the islands. This was our 4-night escape from routine, from responsibilities, from the ordinary life we'd built together over 25 years. The first day was absolutely perfect. We explored every corner of that ship like excited tourists. We attended the welcome dinner where the captain made jokes and the staff performed a choreographed dance. We watched the sunset from the top deck, the sky turning impossible shades of orange and pink over the endless ocean. That evening, we participated in family trivia night in one of the lounges, laughing as Tom confidently gave wrong answers and Christopher corrected him. I felt completely normal, completely healthy, completely happy. I had no idea that within 12 hours, I would be dying. We went to bed around midnight, exhausted from all the walking and excitement. Tom fell asleep immediately, but I remember lying in that dark cabin for a while, listening to the gentle hum of the ship's engines, feeling grateful for my family, for this adventure, for everything we'd built together. Eventually, sleep came. At exactly 6 a.m., I woke up to a sensation I'd never experienced before. My left arm felt strange, not painful exactly, but heavy and tingling, like it had fallen asleep, but worse. Much worse. I flexed my fingers, trying to shake off the feeling. Within seconds, the tingling became a burning sensation that radiated up my arm and into my shoulder. Then the crushing started. I've heard people describe heart attacks as feeling like an elephant sitting on your chest. But that doesn't capture it. It felt like my rib cage was being squeezed in a vice, tighter and tighter, until I couldn't draw a full breath. The pain was radiating across my chest now, spreading like fire. I sat up in bed, gasping, my hand instinctively going to my chest. "Tom," I managed to whisper. "Tom, something's wrong." He woke instantly, the way husbands do after 25 years of marriage. One look at my face in the dim cabin light, and he was out of bed, pulling on his pants. "What's happening? What hurts?" "My chest. My arm. Tom, I can't breathe. Right. Have you ever seen someone you love realize you might be dying?" That's what I saw in Tom's eyes. He ran to the cabin door, didn't even bother with shoes, and sprinted down the corridor to the room where Christopher and Emma were staying. I could hear him pounding on their door, his voice urgent and panicked. The pain in my chest was intensifying, waves of agony that made my vision blur. I was sweating profusely despite the air conditioning. My left arm had gone completely numb. Christopher burst into our cabin first, his phone already in his hand. He called the ship's medical line at 6:12 a.m. I remember seeing the time on the bedside clock and thinking how strange it was to notice such a detail when I might be dying. The operator told him help was coming immediately. Those 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. Tom sat next to me on the bed, holding my right hand because I couldn't feel my left one anymore. Emma stood in the doorway, her face pale, tears already streaming down her cheeks. I wanted to tell her I was okay, but I wasn't okay. The crushing sensation in my chest had become unbearable. I tried to tell Tom I loved him, but the words wouldn't come out right. Then my vision started tunneling, everything going dark at the edges. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was Tom's voice, desperate and terrified, saying, "Stay with me, Linda. Stay with me." I don't remember the medical team arriving. I don't remember them rushing into our cramped cabin with their equipment. I don't remember Tom and the kids being pushed out into the narrow hallway. I was gone by then. My heart stopped, my body shutting down. I was in full cardiac arrest at 54 years old on a cruise ship anchored near a beach paradise. What I learned later is that the ship's doctor and 2 nurses worked on me for 30 minutes straight. 30 minutes of CPR in that tiny interior cabin on Deck 7. Tom told me later that he stood in that hallway with Christopher and Emma, watching through the open doorway as strangers fought to bring his wife back to life. Emma was sobbing uncontrollably. Christopher had his arm around his sister but couldn't stop shaking. Tom just stood there frozen, certain he was watching me die. Imagine watching someone perform CPR on the person you've loved for 25 years, knowing each compression might be the last. The medical team kept working. The doctor performed chest compressions while a nurse prepared medication and another monitored equipment. They debated in urgent whispers whether a helicopter evacuation was possible from the ship's current position. But we were too far from any equipped facility. The crushing reality was that if they couldn't revive me right there, in that cabin, I would die. After what felt like an eternity to Tom, 29 minutes by the doctor's count, they detected a weak pulse. My heart was beating again. Barely. I was still unconscious, still in critical condition, but alive. The crew made an emergency call for a shuttle boat. Because we were anchored near Airlie Beach, they could transport me to shore, but it would take time. Tom was forced to make an impossible decision. Stay on the cruise ship with Emma and Christopher, or abandon the ship and everything they'd planned to follow me to the hospital. It wasn't really a decision at all. Within minutes, they'd grabbed passports and phones and told the cruise line they were leaving. The shuttle boat ride to shore took 45 agonizing minutes. I was strapped to a gurney, still unconscious, while a nurse monitored my vitals. Tom held my hand the entire time, terrified that weak pulse would stop again. Emma and Christopher sat in silence, processing the fact that their mother had just died and come back. We reached Proserpine Hospital, where the local medical team was waiting. But I needed more advanced care than they could provide. A rescue helicopter was already en route. Tom watched as they loaded me onto the helicopter, still unconscious, still barely alive. He couldn't come with me. There wasn't room. He stood on that hospital helipad watching the helicopter lift off, carrying his wife away, not knowing if he'd ever speak to me again. The next 5 days exist in my memory only as darkness. They placed me in an induced coma at Mackay Base Hospital ICU. My body needed to heal from the trauma of the heart attack and the 30 minutes of CPR that had broken 2 of my ribs. Tom slept in hospital chairs, refusing to leave even to find a hotel. Emma and Christopher took turns bringing him food he barely ate. They'd traveled to Australia for a celebration and instead found themselves in a foreign hospital keeping vigil over their mother. On day 5, I woke up. The first thing I saw was Tom's face, unshaven and exhausted, hovering over me. The first thing I felt was his hand gripping mine. The first thing I heard was Emma crying with relief somewhere to my right. I tried to speak but had a breathing tube down my throat. A doctor appeared and explained I'd had a massive heart attack, that I'd been clinically dead, that I'd been in a coma for 5 days. "You're very lucky to be alive," he said. And I heard the unspoken part. "You should be dead." The angiogram revealed severe blockages in multiple arteries. Blockages I never knew existed despite years of clean checkups. I needed immediate cardiac procedures. The doctors couldn't believe I'd had no symptoms before that morning. No warning signs. No indication that my heart was a ticking time bomb. The surgeries were successful, but the recovery was brutal. I spent another week in the hospital, then 2 more weeks in recovery accommodations in Australia before I was cleared to fly home. Our 25th anniversary celebration had turned into a month-long medical nightmare halfway around the world. But here's what haunts me most. The psychological aftermath. I have PTSD now. I can't sleep in rooms without windows. That interior, cabin on deck 7, that dark, windowless box where I died, left scars that have nothing to do with my heart. When I'm in enclosed spaces, I panic. My breathing becomes shallow. I feel that crushing sensation returning even though my heart is fine now. Tom has to talk me through it, reminding me I'm safe, I'm alive, I'm okay. I can't look at cruise advertisements without my chest tightening. I hear people talk about their wonderful vacation cruises, and I want to scream. Do you know what can happen? Do you know how fast paradise can become hell? The ship's medical team saved my life. I know that. If that heart attack had happened at home, in my sleep, with Tom beside me but no medical equipment nearby, I would have died. The doctor told me it was a terrifying lottery. I happened to die at the exact right place and time for revival to be possible. 30 minutes of CPR on land often results in severe brain damage. But somehow, I woke up 5 days later with my mind intact, my memories preserved, my ability to speak and think and love my family completely unchanged. It's been 8 months since that morning on the cruise ship. I'm back to teaching 3rd grade, but I have a defibrillator implanted in my chest now. I take medication every day. I see a therapist every week to deal with the trauma. Emma calls me every single morning to make sure I'm okay. Christopher researched every cardiac symptom and emergency response procedure he could find because he never wants to feel that helpless again. And Tom? Tom looks at me sometimes with this expression of profound grief mixed with relief, like he's seeing both the wife he almost lost and the miracle that she's still here. We haven't celebrated our 25th anniversary yet. Neither of us can bring ourselves to plan anything. The trauma is too fresh. The memory of that cabin too vivid. People ask me if I'm grateful to be alive, and I am. But I'm also angry. Angry that my body betrayed me without warning. Angry that a dream vacation became a nightmare. Angry that I have to live with this fear now, this constant awareness that my heart might stop again without notice. They call me a miracle survivor. They say I beat the odds. But survival isn't what I expected it would be. It's carrying the weight of knowing you died, that you left your family in agony, that you came back but left parts of yourself behind in that dark cabin on deck 7. I'm alive, but I'm forever changed. And that cruise ship paradise will always be the place where I learned how quickly everything can end. My name is Charlie, and I'm 62 years old. I spent 35 years as a nurse in Georgia, working in emergency rooms, trauma units, and intensive care. I've seen burns, smoke inhalation victims, and people fighting for their lives in ways most can never imagine. I thought I'd seen everything. I thought my career had prepared me for any emergency. I was wrong. When I retired last year, my husband Richard surprised me with a dream vacation, an Azamara cruise through Asia. We'd be exploring ancient temples, coastal villages, and experiencing cultures we'd only read about. Our friends Margaret and Paul would be joining us on the same voyage, making it even more special. We booked a cabin on deck 10, starboard side, with a balcony overlooking the ocean. Everything was perfect. We departed from the Manila area on a Thursday afternoon. The Azamara Quest was smaller than those massive cruise ships you see in commercials. Only about 1,000 people total between passengers and crew. It felt intimate, luxurious, like we were part of an exclusive club. The service was exceptional. The staff remembered our names by day 2. The food was restaurant quality at every meal. The first 4 days were absolutely magical. We toured Buddhist temples with golden spires that seemed to touch the clouds. We walked through coastal villages where children waved at us from doorways and vendors sold handmade crafts. We ate local cuisine prepared by ship chefs who explained every ingredient and cooking method. Richard and I would sit on our balcony every evening, watching the sun set over the South China Sea, feeling grateful for this life we'd built together. Friday evening arrived warm and calm. We'd been at sea all day, heading toward Sandakan, Malaysia. Richard and I dressed for dinner. He wore his navy blazer. I wore the emerald dress I'd bought specifically for this trip. We met Margaret and Paul at the entrance to the main dining room on Deck 5 at exactly 8 p.m. The dining room was elegant. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, soft piano music playing in the background. We were seated at a table near the center of the room, surrounded by other passengers laughing and sharing stories of their adventures. I ordered the seafood special. Richard chose steak. We were talking about tomorrow's planned shore excursion to a nature reserve, debating whether we were fit enough for the hiking involved. At 8:19 p.m., our peaceful evening exploded into chaos. The alert that changed everything started with 3 words repeated over and over: "Bravo, bravo, bravo." For those who don't know, that's the code for fire on a ship. Within seconds, everyone in that dining room understood this wasn't a drill. The atmosphere shifted instantly from relaxed conversation to controlled panic. I saw Captain Leif Carlson, who'd been dining just 3 tables away from us, drop his napkin and sprint from the room. Chefs in white uniforms came running out of the kitchen, their expressions urgent and frightened. Then we smelled it. Smoke. Thick, acrid, chemical smoke that made my eyes water instantly. The dining room began filling with dark, choking smoke faster than seemed possible. Within 30 seconds, visibility dropped dramatically. People were coughing, standing up from their tables in confusion, looking around for direction that wasn't coming. My nursing instincts kicked in immediately. I grabbed cloth napkins from our table, dunked them in our water glasses, and handed them to Richard, Margaret, and Paul. "Cover your nose and mouth," I ordered. "Stay low. Smoke rises." But this wasn't ordinary smoke. This was thick, black, toxic smoke that burned the lungs with every breath. All around us, passengers were panicking. Some were screaming, others were frozen in place, unsure what to do. The elegant dining room had transformed into a scene from a nightmare. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness. The fire had knocked out the ship's main power. 1,000 people in the middle of the ocean, and suddenly we had no electricity, no air conditioning, no lights. Emergency lighting kicked in within seconds, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made the smoke look even more menacing. Through the haze and chaos, I heard crew members shouting orders. "All passengers to muster stations. Proceed to your assembly areas. Stay calm." But calm was impossible. We were on a ship that was on fire, powerless, drifting 75 nautical miles south of Tubataha Reef in the Philippines. We were miles from land, from help, from safety. Richard grabbed my hand. "Stay with me," he said, his voice steady despite the fear I saw in his eyes. We joined the crowd of passengers trying to exit the dining room. Margaret and Paul were right behind us. The corridors were filling with smoke just as quickly as the dining room had. We made our way toward the muster stations, following the emergency lighting. The ship's air conditioning had died with the power, and the tropical heat combined with the smoke made every breath feel like inhaling fire. Around us, elderly passengers were struggling. Children were crying. Crew members were trying to maintain order while clearly terrified themselves. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. There was no emergency response team with breathing equipment rushing to help us. In a hospital, when there's a fire, trained teams with oxygen masks and protective gear evacuate patients. On this ship, in the middle of the ocean, we were on our own. Just passengers and crew trying to escape smoke-filled corridors with nothing but wet napkins pressed to our faces. Richard and I reached a stairwell. The smoke was so thick now that I couldn't see more than 2 feet ahead. We dropped to our hands and knees, crawling up the stairs toward our designated muster station on deck 10. I held onto the back of Richard's shirt with one hand, using my other hand to feel the stairs ahead of me. Behind me, could hear Margaret coughing violently. We were about halfway up when the ship shifted violently. I don't know if it was a wave or something related to the fire, but the entire vessel lurched to one side. I was thrown against the stairwell wall, my shoulder hitting hard enough to make me cry out. My grip on Richard's shirt tore away. "Richard!" I tried to shout, but smoke filled my mouth and lungs. I couldn't get enough air to make a sound. I reached out in the darkness, trying to find him, but my hands found only empty air. Panic, unlike anything I'd ever experienced, flooded through me. I was a trained emergency nurse. I dealt with disasters. But this was different. This was my husband somewhere in this smoke-filled darkness, and I couldn't find him. Then I heard his voice, weak and terrified. "Charlie, don't let me die. Please don't let me die." Those words will haunt me for the rest of my life. Hearing the man I'd spent 40 years with, the man who'd always been strong, always been my rock, begging not to die in that moment, broke something inside me. I crawled frantically in the direction of his voice, calling his name. But the smoke was too thick, and my lungs were burning. Every breath felt like inhaling acid. I could hear him coughing somewhere nearby, but I couldn't reach him. Other passengers were crawling past me, stepping over me, everyone focused only on their own survival. I don't know how long I searched in that stairwell. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My vision was tunneling. I was getting dizzy from smoke inhalation. I knew the signs. I'd treated them hundreds of times in the ER. I was in danger of passing out. A crew member appeared through the smoke, a young man with a flashlight and a wet towel over his face. He grabbed my arm and pulled me up the stairs. I tried to tell him about Richard, but I couldn't form words. He dragged me to the muster station on deck 10, where hundreds of passengers stood in their life jackets in the open air, watching smoke pour from various parts of the ship. The fire crews were battling the blaze, but I learned later it took them 90 minutes to extinguish it. The ship's construction, with highly combustible balcony materials, had made the fire spread quickly and produce incredibly dense smoke. There were no sprinklers in external areas, no fire extinguishers mounted on balconies. The ship had been a floating fire hazard, and we'd had no idea. Those 90 minutes at the muster station were torture. I stood there in my smoke-stained emerald dress, unable to find Richard among the crowds of passengers. Margaret and Paul had made it out. But where was my husband? I went from crew member to crew member, asking if anyone had seen him, describing him, begging for help. Finally, power was partially restored. The smoke began to clear, and I saw him. Richard was on a stretcher being carried by medical staff. He was unconscious. His face was covered in soot. They rushed him to the ship's medical center while I ran behind them, screaming his name. Smoke inhalation, severe respiratory distress. He'd passed out in that stairwell and been found by crew members. The ship's medical team did what they could, but Richard needed hospital care. We were still hours from port. When we finally reached Sandakan, Malaysia, escorted by a Malaysian patrol boat because we could only move at 3 to 6 knots with one partially working engine, Richard was immediately evacuated to a local hospital. I learned later that one passenger had died from smoke inhalation while trying to escape. One person who'd boarded this luxury cruise expecting paradise, just like we had, and never made it off the ship alive. The investigation revealed horrifying details. The fire had originated on a balcony on deck 10, near our cabin. The balcony materials were highly combustible and produced that toxic black smoke. The ship had no adequate fire suppression systems in external areas. Safety regulations had been met on paper, but were inadequate in practice. Azamara offered us a full refund and a 25% discount on a future cruise. A future cruise, as if we'd ever step foot on a ship again after this nightmare. Richard survived, but he has permanent lung damage now. He carries an inhaler everywhere. He can't exercise without getting winded. Simple activities like climbing stairs leave him breathless. The man who used to hike mountains with me now struggles walking from the car to the grocery store. And I carry different scars. I hear his voice in my nightmares. Don't let me die. I wake up gasping, feeling like I'm back in that smoke-filled stairwell, unable to reach him. I trained my entire career to save lives in emergencies, and when my own husband needed me, I couldn't help him. We learned that cruise ships operate under different safety standards than buildings on land. What would be illegal construction in a Georgia hospital is perfectly legal on a cruise ship in international waters. The very balcony we'd sat on every evening, watching those beautiful sunsets, was built from materials that could have killed us. It's been over a year since that night. Richard and I don't talk about cruises anymore. When friends mention vacation plans involving ships, we change the subject. Our dream retirement celebration turned into a month-long medical nightmare that fundamentally changed our lives. I spent 35 years as a nurse saving people from fires, from smoke, from disasters. But nothing in my training prepared me for being trapped on a burning ship in the middle of the ocean, crawling through smoke-filled corridors, hearing my husband beg for his life while I helplessly searched for him in the darkness. That's a kind of horror that never goes away. And every time Richard reaches for his inhaler, I'm reminded of the night paradise burned. They told us it would be a minor inconvenience, just some weather off the Carolina coast that we'd easily outrun. The captain's voice over the intercom was calm, almost cheerful, as we departed Bayonne, New Jersey that Saturday morning in February. I'm Jessica, a marketing director from Brooklyn, and this was supposed to be our first family cruise. A week of relaxation in the Bahamas with my husband Daniel and our 20-month-old son, Liam. We'd planned this trip for months. Daniel and I worked demanding jobs, rarely taking real time off. This cruise was our chance to disconnect completely. We'd agreed to go off-grid, no work emails, no social media, just quality family time watching our toddler discover the ocean for the first time. The Royal Caribbean Anthem of the Seas was massive, one of the largest cruise ships in the world. Over 4,000 passengers and 1,600 crew members. Walking through those gleaming corridors on embarkation day, I felt confident. How could something this enormous, this modern, this technologically advanced possibly be unsafe? The first morning was everything we'd hoped for. Liam's face lit up when he saw the kids' play area. Bright colors, soft foam structures, other toddlers running around squealing with joy. Daniel and I took turns watching him while the other explored the ship. We ate pancakes at the buffet. We walked the deck watching seabirds follow our wake. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, calm and blue under a clear sky. Around noon on Sunday, I noticed the ride getting rougher. Not alarmingly so, just enough that I had to concentrate on walking straight. The ship was swaying more than it had been. Daniel suggested we take Liam back to the cabin for his nap, and I agreed. By 1 p.m., I couldn't stand upright without holding on to something. The ship was pitching violently now, rolling from side to side in ways that made my stomach lurch. Daniel laid Liam down in the portable crib we'd brought, but our son kept rolling against the sides as the ship tilted. I ventured out into the corridor to see what was happening. What I saw made my blood run cold. Crew members were frantically taping merchandise onto shelves in the gift shop. Items were flying off displays despite their efforts. The employee rushed past me carrying rolls of packing tape, her expression grim. Down the hall, I could hear crashes as things fell in other cabins. Back in the kids' play area, where we'd been just hours earlier, chaos had erupted. A mother later told me her little boy had been sitting in a little Tyke's car when the ship rolled so violently that the plastic car tipped over and sent him flying across the padded floor into the wall. Children were screaming. Parents were grabbing their kids and running for their cabins. This wasn't some weather. This was something catastrophic. At approximately 2:30 p.m., the announcement came. The captain's voice had lost its cheerful tone. All passengers must return to their cabins immediately. We are experiencing severe storm conditions. Remain in your staterooms until further notice. Daniel and I locked eyes across our cabin. Liam was crying, picking up on our fear even though he was too young to understand. Through our window, I could see waves unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Massive walls of gray water rising higher than seemed physically possible, crashing over the lower decks. The ship began tilting at angles I didn't think were survivable. Objects in our cabin started sliding. The glasses we'd left on the bathroom counter flew off and shattered on the floor. Our suitcases, which we'd placed against the wall, toppled over and slid across the room. I grabbed Liam from his crib and held him against my chest, sitting on the bed because standing was impossible. Daniel turned on the cabin TV to check the ship's information channel. That's when I saw the numbers that made my heart stop. Wind speed 106 knots. That's 122 miles per hour. Hurricane force winds. We were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in a hurricane. The next several hours exist in my memory as a blur of terror punctuated by moments of absolute clarity. The ship would roll so violently to one side that I was certain we were going to capsize. I'd grip the bed frame with one hand and Liam with the other, feeling the entire massive vessel tip at what felt like a 45-degree angle. Everything not bolted down would slide to that side of the cabin. Our clothes, shoes, toiletries, everything crashing into the wall in a heap. Then the ship would roll back the other way, and everything would slide to the opposite wall. Back and forth, for hours. Liam was hysterical. Daniel tried to keep him calm, singing songs and playing games, but our son could feel the terror in the room. I was lying in bed shaking and crying, trying not to let Liam see my face. I was having a full panic attack, but attempting to hide it because I didn't want to traumatize my baby even more than he already was. For the first time in my adult life, I genuinely believed I was going to die. Not in some abstract, distant way. I mean, I laid in that bed calculating how long it would take the ship to sink if we capsized. I thought about whether the lifeboats could even launch in these conditions. I thought about Liam drowning in the freezing Atlantic and whether I could keep him alive or if we'd all die together. These weren't panicked thoughts. They were calm, methodical preparations for death. Around 5 p.m., I abandoned our plan to stay off-grid. I didn't care about work-life balance or quality family time anymore. I wanted my mother to know I loved her. I purchased the ship's Wi-Fi package and sent her a message. Ship in major storm. Very scared. I love you. Tell everyone I love them. She responded immediately, terrified, asking what was happening. I told her we were in hurricane-force winds in the Atlantic, that I didn't know if we'd survive, that if something happened to please tell Liam about us when he got older. The captain's updates over the intercom weren't reassuring. He explained that the storm had intensified beyond all forecasts. Instead of avoiding it, he'd made the decision to turn the ship directly into the storm to fight the wind and waves. I didn't understand what that meant, but it sounded like we were deliberately driving into the worst of it. The terror lasted 12 hours. 12 solid hours of violent rolling, of belongings crashing back and forth, of Liam screaming, of Daniel trying desperately to maintain some semblance of calm while I completely fell apart. The cabin was trashed. Broken glass everywhere, water seeping in from somewhere. Our belongings scattered across the floor in chaos. Sometime around 1 a.m., I felt the rolling decrease slightly. The captain announced that conditions were improving and we were turning around. We weren't going to the Bahamas anymore. We weren't going to Florida. We were limping back to New Jersey. When I finally emerged from the cabin the next morning, I couldn't believe what I saw. The ship looked like a war zone. Ceiling panels had collapsed in the public corridors, hanging down in jagged pieces. Chairs and tables were overturned throughout the common areas. Broken glass glittered across the floors. The smell of vomit was overwhelming. Hundreds of passengers had been violently seasick during the storm. The crew was doing damage control, both literal and figurative. They'd put up barriers around the most damaged areas and were trying to restore some sense of normalcy. The buffet was open but had maybe a quarter of its usual food. Most passengers looked shell-shocked, moving through the ship like zombies. I told Daniel I was getting off the ship the moment we reached Florida and never getting back on. I didn't care if we had to book flights home. I was done. But we couldn't dock in Florida. Another storm system was developing, and the captain deemed it unsafe to approach Port Canaveral. We had to return all the way to New Jersey, adding days to this nightmare voyage. When we finally saw the Bayonne port, I cried with relief. I have never been so happy to see New Jersey in my entire life. Daniel and I disembarked with Liam as quickly as possible. Media crews were everywhere, interviewing passengers. Some people were angry, shouting at Royal Caribbean representatives about negligence. Others were just grateful to be alive. Royal Caribbean later issued an apology, saying the storm's severity exceeded all forecasts. They claimed winds were predicted to be 46 to 57 mph, but actually reached 125 mph. They offered full refunds us and 50% credits toward future cruises. Future cruises. As if anyone who'd survived that would ever willingly board a ship again. The National Transportation Safety Board launched an investigation into why the ship sailed into such dangerous conditions. Senator Bill Nelson's office got involved, asking why cruise ships routinely venture into severe weather. Royal Caribbean promised to improve their storm avoidance protocols. But none of that changes what we experienced. None of that erases those 12 hours of pure terror, of holding my baby and genuinely believing we would die together in the Atlantic Ocean. None of that fixes the trauma. Liam is 3 now. He has no memory of the cruise, thank God. But Daniel and I carry it with us every day. I have nightmares about tilting ships and massive waves. Daniel flinches when he hears wind rattling windows. We've turned down multiple vacation opportunities because they involved boats of any kind. People ask if I think the captain was negligent, if Royal Caribbean should have known better. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe the storm really did intensify beyond predictions. Maybe it was a freak occurrence. But what I do know is that when you're lying in bed clutching your toddler while a massive ship rolls at 45-degree angles in hurricane-force winds, the why doesn't matter anymore. The Anthem of the Seas was designed to handle extreme weather. It had every modern safety feature, every backup system, every technological advantage. And it nearly killed us anyway. That's what haunts me most. Not that we were on some rickety old vessel with inadequate safety measures, but that we were on one of the most advanced cruise ships ever built, and it still couldn't protect us from nature's fury. We were supposed to be relaxing in the Bahamas, watching Liam play in the sand, sipping drinks by the pool. Instead, we spent 12 hours preparing to die. The vacation photos from that trip show the first morning only. Liam's delighted face in the kids' area, our smiling family selfie on the deck. Then, nothing. Because after that, we were too busy surviving to take pictures. That trip was supposed to be the start of a family tradition, the first of many cruises as Liam grew up. Instead, it's the reason I'll never set foot on a cruise ship again. The reason I panic when I see storm warnings. The reason I hold Liam just a little tighter every single day. Royal Caribbean made it right financially, but there's no refund for trauma. There's no discount code that erases the memory of your child screaming in terror while you try to accept that you're all about to die together. Some people who were on that voyage with us still defend the captain, still cruise regularly, still believe it was just bad luck. I'm not one of them. Because I was there. I felt that ship roll. I prepared for death. And that's not something you forget or forgive, no matter how many apologies or refunds you receive. The ocean almost took everything from me, and I'll never give it another chance. Freedom. That's what this trip was supposed to represent. After 18 months of lawyers, courtrooms, and dividing assets, my divorce was finally finalized. I was Angela, 35 years old, starting fresh. My best friend Rachel convinced me we needed a celebration, a proper girls' trip to mark the beginning of my new life. We chose a 10-day carnival cruise through the Mexican Riviera, splurging on everything we'd normally skip: private cabanas, premium excursions, spa packages. This wasn't just a vacation. It was me reclaiming joy. The first 5 days exceeded every expectation. We lounged on pristine beaches in Cabo San Lucas. We got couples massages, best friends massages, Rachel corrected with a laugh, at the ship's spa. We shopped in ports, buying handmade crafts and silver jewelry we definitely didn't need, but wanted anyway. Rachel and I stayed up late every night on our balcony, drinking wine and talking about my future plans, about the relief of being free from a marriage that had slowly suffocated me. By day 6, when we docked in Puerto Vallarta, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in years. The ship offered dozens of shore excursions, and Rachel and I chose one that sounded perfect: a guided nature trail hike to El Nogalito, a remote pueblo with a waterfall and historic church. The excursion description promised authentic Mexican culture away from tourist crowds and breathtaking natural beauty. It was an official carnival excursion, booked directly through the cruise line, which meant it was supposed to be safe and vetted. 22 of us boarded a chartered bus at the port that Thursday morning around 9 a.m. The group was diverse: elderly couples, a few families with teenagers, solo travelers like Rachel and me. Our tour guide, a young Mexican man named Carlos, was enthusiastic and funny, telling stories about local history as we drove away from the coast toward the mountains. The route took us on progressively narrower roads, climbing into countryside that looked nothing like the resort areas we'd seen from the ship. I was wearing my grandmother's wedding ring, the one piece of jewelry from my marriage I'd kept because it predated my ex-husband. Rachel wore the silver bracelet we'd bought in Cabo 2 days earlier. We had our cameras ready, excited to capture the waterfall Carlos kept promising was just ahead, very beautiful. 45 minutes into the drive, the bus rounded a curve on a narrow mountain road with a steep drop-off on one side. Suddenly, Carlos shouted something I didn't understand. The driver slammed the brakes so hard that passengers lurched forward against seatbacks. Some people yelped in surprise. I grabbed Rachel's arm instinctively. That's when I saw them. Massive tree branches and rocks scattered across the road, creating an impossible barricade. Before my brain could process whether this was an accident or something else, I heard the sound that still echoes in my nightmares. Glass shattering. A rock, not a pebble, but a fist-sized chunk of stone, crashed through the windshield. The driver threw his arms up to shield his face. And then, they were on us. 4 masked men materialized, as if from nowhere, moving with the precision of people who'd done this many times before. 2 came through the front door beside the driver. 2 more forced open the emergency exit at the rear of the bus. All 4 carried guns, dark, ugly handguns that they waved at us while shouting in rapid Spanish. Their faces were covered with bandanas. They wore ordinary clothes, jeans, t-shirts, but they moved like soldiers executing a practiced operation. The entire bus froze. 22 people, some on vacation, some celebrating like me, some probably on their dream trip they'd saved years for. All of us rendered completely silent and helpless in the span of 3 seconds. Carlos, our enthusiastic tour guide, dropped to a crouch in the front of the bus. He wasn't translating anymore. He wasn't protecting us. He was terrified, hands visible, making himself small. Later I would wonder if he'd known this might happen. If he'd been complicit or just another victim of a system where crime had become predictable. One of the gunmen, the tallest one, the one who seemed to be in charge, shouted something in Spanish that even I could understand from tone alone. Cooperate or die. They moved systematically, row by row, starting from the front. The first robber would point his gun at passengers while the second collected valuables. Wallets, cameras, phones, watches, jewelry. They took everything, stuffing items into a duffel bag with mechanical efficiency. I sat frozen in my seat, Rachel beside me, gripping my hand so tightly her nails drew blood. We were in row 7, which meant we had maybe 90 seconds to watch this horror show approach us before it was our turn. 90 seconds to hear other passengers crying, pleading, to watch an elderly woman try to hide her purse under her seat, only to have it yanked away violently. Time does strange things when you're watching someone with a gun walk toward you, knowing there's nowhere to run. Rachel was sobbing beside me, but I couldn't make a sound. My throat had closed completely. I watched the gunman get closer, row 4, row 5, row 6. An elderly man in row 5 moved too slowly, removing his watch. The robber struck him across the temple with his gun handle. The man crumpled. His wife screamed. Blood appeared on his gray hair. Then they were at our row. The gunman's eyes met mine through the holes in his bandana. Brown eyes. Young, maybe mid-20s. He gestured with the gun toward my purse. I handed it over with shaking hands. He took my camera from my lap. Then he grabbed my left hand and stared at my grandmother's ring. I don't know what possessed me, but I tried to shake my head. It was the only thing I'd kept from my old life that mattered. The gunman's eyes narrowed. He grabbed my finger and twisted the ring. It didn't come off easily. I'd worn it for 8 years. He twisted harder, pulling and yanking. The pain shot through my finger, but I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Finally, the ring tore free, taking skin with it. My finger bled. He pocketed my grandmother's ring without a second glance. Beside me, Rachel was struggling to remove her bracelet. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't work the clasp. The second robber lost patience and yanked it off her wrist, scratching her skin badly enough to draw blood. Rachel let out a choked sob. 3 rows behind us, a woman screamed. Maybe she was refusing to hand something over, or maybe she was just terrified. The tall gunman who seemed to be leading this operation whipped around and pointed his weapon directly at her head. He shouted something threatening. The woman went silent immediately, but the air in the bus had changed. This could escalate. Someone could die. The robbery lasted 8 minutes by the clock on my phone, which they also took. 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. They worked through all 12 rows, taking approximately $15,000 worth of passenger belongings according to the insurance claims we'd file later. Passports, medication, one woman's insulin. They took it all. When they'd cleaned us out completely, the 4 men jumped off the bus and disappeared into the brush beside the road. We sat in stunned silence for maybe 5 minutes. Nobody moving, nobody speaking. The elderly man who'd been hit was slumped in his seat, his wife pressing a scarf to his bleeding head. Carlos slowly stood up from where he'd been crouched, his face pale. The driver backed the bus up slowly, carefully, and took an alternate route down the mountain. Nobody spoke during the 90-minute drive back to Puerto Vallarta. Just crying. Quiet, shocked crying from various parts of the bus. Rachel and I sat holding hands, both our wrists bloody, staring at nothing. We arrived at the port 3 hours after we'd left. Carnival staff were waiting with clipboards and forms. They'd clearly received word. We were ushered into a private room where we gave statements to local police through a translator who seemed bored by the whole process. The elderly man who'd been struck was taken to the ship's medical center for stitches. A Carnival representative offered their sincere apologies and informed us we'd receive $200 in onboard credit as compensation. $200 for being held at gunpoint, for being robbed of thousands of dollars in valuables, for being traumatized. Rachel actually laughed when they said it. A harsh, bitter sound I'd never heard from her before. Over the next few days, as the ship continued its itinerary like nothing had happened, I started asking questions. Other passengers whispered stories. Apparently, this wasn't the first such robbery, or the second, or even the third. This was the 4th armed robbery of Carnival excursion, buses in the Puerto Vallarta region in 18 months. 4 times this had happened, and Carnival had continued offering and profiting from these excursions without warning passengers about the pattern. When I confronted guest services, they claimed each incident was isolated and unpredictable. But 4 times in 18 months isn't unpredictable. That's a pattern. That's a known risk they'd chosen not to disclose. Rachel and I couldn't enjoy the rest of the cruise. While other passengers laughed at comedy shows and lounged by pools, we stayed in our cabin with the door locked. I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the corridor made me jump. Rachel developed panic attacks, real ones where she couldn't breathe and thought she was dying. On what should have been our final celebratory dinner, we ate room service in silence. The friendship that had survived 15 years started showing cracks. Rachel blamed me for choosing the excursion. I blamed her for pushing this whole cruise idea. Neither of us was rational. We were both traumatized. But trauma doesn't make you kind. It makes you strike out at whoever's closest. When we disembarked in Los Angeles, Rachel's husband picked her up. She hugged me goodbye, but it felt perfunctory. We promised to talk soon. That was 11 months ago. We've texted maybe 5 times since. Shared trauma doesn't always bring people closer. Sometimes it just reminds you of the worst moment of your life every time you see each other's faces. I filed a lawsuit against Carnival for negligence. My lawyer uncovered documents proving the cruise line knew about the previous 3 robberies, but never updated their excursion warnings or disclosures. They'd continued marketing these trips as safe, vetted experiences while knowing passengers were being targeted. We settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement I regret signing, but I was emotionally exhausted and couldn't face years of litigation. I'm in therapy now. Have been for almost a year. I can't ride in buses anymore. Even city buses trigger panic attacks. I hyperventilate in vehicles if I can't see the driver clearly. I don't wear rings. My jewelry box sits unopened because the thought of putting on anything valuable makes my stomach turn. The trip that was supposed to celebrate my freedom instead created a new prison. I'm free from my marriage, yes, but now I'm trapped by anxiety and fear. I can't travel without elaborate safety research. I can't relax in unfamiliar places. That spontaneous, adventurous part of me that Rachel loved? The robbers took that along with my grandmother's ring. People say I should be grateful nobody died. And I am. But gratitude doesn't erase trauma. Being grateful you survived something horrible doesn't mean it didn't destroy parts of who you were. My divorce gave me back my life. That bus robbery taught me how quickly someone can take it away again. And Carnival Cruise Lines facilitated both the crime and the cover-up, all while collecting profits from passengers who trusted them to keep us safe. I'll never trust that easily again. Maybe that's the real thing they stole. Not my grandmother's ring or my camera or my money. They stole my ability to believe the world is fundamentally safe. And no settlement check, no therapy session, no amount of time can give that back. My name is Elijah, and before that night on the cruise ship, I would have laughed at anyone who believed in ghosts. I'm a freelance photographer from California, 32 years old, rational, scientifically minded. I've spent 15 years capturing reality through a lens. Light, shadow, composition. Everything I photograph exists in concrete, explainable terms. The supernatural was something for movies and gullible tourists, not for someone like me who made a living documenting the real world. When I booked a last-minute 7-day Carnival Caribbean cruise in late September, it was purely for business. I'd pitched a photo essay to a travel magazine about life aboard modern cruise ships. Candid shots of passengers, crew interactions, the contrast between luxury and labor. The editor loved the concept and gave me a modest advance. I found a deeply discounted interior cabin, room 7042 on deck 7, and figured I'd spend most of my time exploring the ship anyway. Who needs a window when you're working? Boarding day was unremarkable. The usual chaos of embarkation, families with screaming children, elderly couples moving slowly with walkers, solo travelers like me trying to navigate the crowd efficiently. I found my cabin around 3 p.m. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed the cold, not refreshing air conditioning, but actual penetrating cold that made goosebumps rise on my arms despite the tropical Miami heat I'd just left. Room 7042 was standard for an interior cabin. No windows, minimal space, just a bed, tiny bathroom, desk and closet. The walls were beige. The carpet was patterned in that generic way cruise ships favor to hide stains. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that should have felt wrong. But standing in that doorway, I felt an inexplicable reluctance to enter. I dismissed it as claustrophobia from the windowless space and forced myself inside. The first night I slept fine. exhausted from travel and excited about the project. I passed out around 11 p.m. and didn't wake until my alarm at 7 a.m. The cold I'd noticed seemed less intense, and I figured the AC had regulated itself. See? Rational explanation. Nothing paranormal about temperature fluctuations. Day 2. I spent exploring the ship with my camera. I photographed the breakfast buffet chaos, captured crew members setting up deck chairs in perfect rows, got candid shots of passengers at the pool. I met other solo travelers at dinner, a retired teacher, a divorced businessman, a college student on spring break. Normal people having normal conversations. I returned to cabin 7042 around 11 p.m., eager to download the day's photos and start culling through them. I sat at the small desk, laptop open, transferring files from my camera's memory card. The cabin was freezing again, but I was focused on my work. Around 11:30 p.m., the lights flickered. Not dramatically, just a brief dimming and return to brightness. Electrical systems on ships aren't always perfect, I reasoned. Old wiring, power, fluctuations, hundreds of cabins drawing energy simultaneously. Nothing to worry about? At exactly 11:34 p.m., I remember because I glanced at my laptop clock, the cabin phone rang. I stared at it for 2 rings before answering. Who would call me? Nobody knew my cabin number. The magazine editor had my cell phone. I picked up the receiver. Static. Loud, crackling static like an old radio searching for a signal. And underneath it, something else. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing that sounded both near and impossibly far away. I said hello twice. The breathing continued. Then silence. Complete dead silence. Then the line went dead. Cruise ships have strange phone systems, I told myself. Crosswires, technical glitches, nothing sinister about a weird phone call. I hung up, slightly unsettled but determined to stay rational. I turned back to my laptop. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same pattern. Static, breathing, silence. This time I hung up immediately and left the phone off the hook. The constant dial tone was annoying, but better than another call from nowhere. The feeling of being watched settled over me like a heavy blanket. You know that sensation when someone's staring at you from behind? That prickling awareness that you're not alone? I felt it intensely, despite being in a locked cabin on a ship in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. At midnight, 3 loud, deliberate knocks sounded on the wall, separating my cabin from the one next door. Bang, bang, bang. So forceful the framed safety instructions rattled. I jumped, startled. Then felt foolish, obviously my neighbor. Probably accidentally bumped the wall. To be polite, I knocked back. 3 light taps to acknowledge them. Immediately, 3 knocks responded. Same rhythm, same force. As if someone was standing directly on the other side of that wall, mirroring my action. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 12:03 a.m. Pretty late for neighbors to be awake and knocking on walls. I went to my cabin door, opened it, and looked into the corridor. Empty. Completely empty. The neighboring cabin's door was closed, no light showing underneath. The hallway was silent except for the constant hum of the ship's engines and air system. I stepped out and knocked on the neighboring door. No answer. No sounds of movement inside. I tried the cabin across the hall, also silent. Dark. I retreated back into 7042, telling myself people sleep with their lights off, and maybe they'd knocked in their sleep or something. But I knew that was ridiculous. Those knocks had been intentional, responsive, aware. When I turned back toward my desk, I froze. The bathroom door, which I'd left wide open, was slowly closing. Not slamming, not moving from air pressure or the ship's motion, just smoothly, steadily swinging shut as if someone was gently pulling it. I watched it move through its arc until it clicked into place. There was no breeze in the windowless cabin, no air movement that could explain that door closing on its own. My skin erupted in goosebumps. The temperature had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath now, visible in the cabin's fluorescent lighting. That's impossible in a climate-controlled space. But there it was. Proof that something was fundamentally wrong. I approached the bathroom door and jerked it open quickly, half expecting someone to be standing there. Empty. But then I saw them. My camera equipment, 3 lenses, 2 memory cards, and my backup camera body were spread across the bathroom counter in a neat line. Deliberate arrangement, almost displayed. I'd packed all of it in my camera bag, which was zipped closed on the desk. I knew I'd packed it. I was obsessive about my equipment. There was no scenario where I'd taken that gear out and arranged it in the bathroom. None. My hands were shaking as I gathered everything and shoved it back in the bag. This couldn't be happening. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I'd unpacked it and forgotten. Maybe exhaustion was making me misremember. But I knew. Deep down, I knew that gear had been moved by something other than me. I tried to work, tried to focus on editing photos, but the cabin felt hostile now. At 1 a.m., I heard sounds from the bathroom, small clicking noises like makeup containers being opened and closed. I'd heard my sister make those exact sounds countless times. But I didn't have makeup containers. I had camera equipment. I burst into the bathroom, ready to confront whatever was making that noise. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. No movement, no explanation. But I'd heard it clearly. Someone, something, was in that bathroom making noise impossible to explain. I gave up on sleep, turned on every light in the cabin, and sat on the bed, back against the headboard, watching the door, waiting. The feeling of being watched intensified. I could feel eyes on me from somewhere I couldn't identify. The corner? The bathroom? The ceiling? I didn't know, but I knew I wasn't alone. At 3:15 a.m., I woke up. I don't remember falling asleep, but suddenly I was jolting awake with the unmistakable sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. The mattress was compressed, depressed down as if under weight. I could see the indentation in the covers. And then I saw it. A dark figure, seated with its back to me. Not a shadow, a shape. Solid, 3-dimensional. Outlined in the red glow of the emergency exit light, bleeding through the door crack. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. The proportions were off in ways I couldn't immediately identify. I blinked hard, convinced I was still asleep, dreaming, hallucinating from exhaustion. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there, still sitting on my bed. And then, slowly, it began to turn its head toward me. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember scrambling backward against the headboard. But I must have done both because suddenly I was pressed against the wall, gasping, and the figure was gone. Just gone. But the mattress indentation remained. The weight impression where something had been sitting was still visible in the blankets. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Didn't even close my eyes. I sat rigid on that bed until 6 a.m., when the first hints of activity sounded in the corridor outside. The moment it seemed reasonable, I grabbed my bags and fled cabin 7042. Guest services opened at 7 a.m. I was their first customer, waiting outside when the attendant arrived. I explained carefully that I was having issues with my cabin and needed to change rooms. I tried to sound calm, rational, not like someone on the edge of a breakdown. The young woman behind the desk listened to my request about temperature problems and strange noises. And then her expression changed. "Which cabin?" she asked. 7042, Deck 7. She didn't ask follow-up questions, didn't suggest sending maintenance, just nodded and started typing. "I can move you to Deck 10 immediately. Let me just process this." Within 30 minutes, I had a new cabin key. No explanation, no questions about what had happened. Just swift, practiced efficiency that told me they'd done this before. My new cabin on Deck 10 was fine. Normal, warm. I spent the rest of the cruise uneventfully, though my photography project felt hollow now. When I got home and started reviewing my photos, I found images I didn't remember taking. Shots from inside cabin 7042 showing strange lens flares and dark shadows in corners where nothing should cast shadows. I'm a professional photographer. I know lens flares. These weren't normal. I researched cabin 7042 online, found dozens of accounts from passengers describing identical experiences. Phone calls with breathing, knocking on walls, items moved, dark figures. Some crew members reportedly refuse assignments on Deck 7. Passengers nickname it the haunted deck. The cruise line never acknowledges it, but they'll move you without question if you complain about that specific cabin. I'm not the same person who boarded that ship. I photograph reality. But now I know reality includes things my camera can't fully capture. Things that sit on beds in the dark. Things that watch from corners. Things that don't have explanations. I won't cruise again. Can't. The thought of being trapped on a ship with something like that makes my chest tighten. I still have nightmares about that figure turning its head toward me. About the cold of that cabin. About knowing with absolute certainty that I wasn't alone in room 7042. Ghosts aren't real. That's what I believed. But belief doesn't protect you from what exists in the dark spaces ships carry through the ocean. Some cabins should stay empty. Some doors should stay locked. And some experiences can't be explained away by rational minds trying desperately to make sense of the impossible. 2 years of saving. That's how long it took us to afford this cruise. Luke is here. 48 years old, accountant from Ohio, father of 2 teenage daughters who'd been begging for a cruise since they were 12. Susan, my wife, and I had put away $50 here, $100 there, skipping restaurants and movies and new clothes, until we finally had enough for a 7-day Caribbean cruise. Budget line, interior cabin. But all-inclusive dining and entertainment meant the girls could have everything they wanted once we were aboard. We departed Miami on a Saturday in March, all 4 of us giddy with excitement. Emily, 16, and Madison, 14, had researched every detail of the ship for months. They'd mapped out which teen club activities they'd attend, which pools had the best slides, which dining rooms served the best desserts. Susan and I just wanted to relax. 7 days of not cooking, not cleaning, not worrying about mortgage payments or work deadlines. Our cabin on Deck 6 was snug for 4 people, but we didn't care. We'd barely be in it except to sleep. The first 2 days were everything we'd dreamed. The girls practically lived at the teen club, making friends with kids from all over the country. Susan and I lounged by the adult pool, reading books we'd been meaning to finish for years. We ate breakfast buffets that seemed to stretch forever, tried foods we couldn't pronounce, watched sunset after spectacular sunset. By day 3, we'd settled into a cruise ship rhythm. Morning buffet, pool time, shore excursion to a local beach, afternoon nap. Then the evening ritual we'd all been looking forward to. Formal dinner in the main dining room. The dining room that Wednesday evening was elegant in that cruise ship way. White tablecloths, uniformed waiters, soft piano music floating from somewhere unseen. Our waiter, a young man from the Philippines named Carlo, had already memorized our preferences. He brought Emily extra breadsticks without her asking. Madison's water glass never sat empty for more than 30 seconds. Susan and I ordered seafood. The girls chose chicken. Everything was delicious, perfectly seasoned, served with flourish. Then came dessert. The pastry chef had created cream-filled pastries, delicate puff pastry shells filled with sweet vanilla custard, drizzled with chocolate. They looked like something from a French patisserie. Carlo brought a platter of them to our table, explaining they were the chef's specialty, made fresh that afternoon. I ate 3. I'm not proud of that, but they were that good. Susan had 2. Emily ate 1. Madison, always watching her weight, ate half of 1 and gave the rest to Emily. We returned to our cabin around 9 p.m., full and happy. The girls wanted to watch a movie on the cabin TV. Susan and I agreed, and we all piled onto the 2 beds, the 4 of us squished together like when the girls were small. I remember thinking this was what I'd saved for. Not the cruise itself, but these moments of simple family contentment. I fell asleep around 11 p.m. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up with cramping that took my breath away. My abdomen felt like someone was twisting it from the inside. The pain came in waves, each one worse than the last. I stumbled to the bathroom in the dark, not wanting to wake Susan or the girls. Before I could even turn on the light, I was vomiting violently into the toilet. The pain was excruciating, not just nausea, but deep abdominal cramping that made me double over between bouts of vomiting. I heard Susan behind me. "Lucas, are you—" Then she pushed past me and vomited into the sink. We stood there in our tiny cabin bathroom, both of us sick simultaneously, too miserable to even be embarrassed. The next hour was a nightmare. We took turns at the toilet, neither of us able to move more than a few feet from the bathroom. I've had stomach flu before. This was different. More violent, more sudden. My body was trying to expel something toxic, and it was doing so from both ends, with a vengeance I'd never experienced. Around 4 a.m., I heard crying from the other bed. Madison's voice, small and frightened. "Dad, something's wrong." I staggered out of the bathroom to find both girls awake, both pale, both clutching their stomachs. Within minutes, they were as sick as Susan and I were. 4 people. 1 bathroom, the size of a closet. What followed was the most humiliating and physically miserable experience of my entire life. We established a rotation system by necessity. Whoever was actively vomiting got the toilet. The others used plastic trash bags from the cabin. Madison was crying, not just from pain, but from humiliation. She was 14, at that age where dignity matters more than anything. And she was vomiting into a trash bag while her sister held her hair and her parents groaned from their own sickness 3 feet away. I called the ship's medical center around 5 a.m. The nurse who answered sounded tired and unsurprised. "Yes, we've had some illness reports tonight. Are you experiencing vomiting and diarrhea?" "All 4 of us," I managed to say between waves of nausea. "My whole family." "Stay in your cabin. Drink fluids if you can keep them down. We'll have someone bring oral rehydration solution." An hour later, a crew member in a mask left 4 bottles of Pedialyte outside our door. No doctor visit, no examination, just electrolyte drinks and instructions to stay isolated. By 8 a.m., I ventured a look at the ship's internal TV channel that showed daily activities and news. A brief message scrolled across the bottom. "Minor gastrointestinal illness has affected some passengers. Medical team is monitoring the situation. Please practice good hygiene. Minor. 215 passengers, I'd learned that number later, were violently ill, and they called it minor. Around 9 a.m., I heard sounds in the corridor. Groaning, vomiting, other passengers stumbling toward the medical center. I opened our door slightly and saw a line stretching down the hallway. Dozens of people, all looking as miserable as we felt, waiting for medical attention. The ship made an announcement around 10 a.m. All passengers experiencing illness symptoms must remain in their cabins until symptom-free for 24 hours. Quarantine. We were being quarantined. Susan was weeping, not from pain anymore, but from exhaustion and frustration. The girls were lying on their bed in fetal positions, too dehydrated to cry. I tried sipping the electrolyte drink, but couldn't keep anything down. By afternoon, rumors spread through passenger phone calls and the ship's Wi-Fi. The cream-filled pastries from last night's dinner. That's what had done it. Contaminated somehow. Everyone who'd eaten them was sick. The more pastries you'd eaten, the worse your symptoms. I'd eaten 3. I was sicker than anyone in my family. The ship continued on its itinerary. While 200 passengers were confined to their cabins, violently ill, the ship docked at St. Thomas. Healthy passengers disembarked for excursions. Life went on for everyone who hadn't eaten those pastries. We listened to people laughing in the corridors, talking about their island adventures, while we took turns vomiting into our tiny toilet. Madison stopped vomiting around hour 36, but wouldn't eat anything. She just lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, occasionally crying. Susan tried to comfort her, but she was barely functional herself. Emily, always the stronger one, managed to shower on day 2 but was so weak she nearly collapsed in the tiny bathroom. The ship finally sent a doctor to check on us on our 2nd day of quarantine. He was professional but rushed, clearly dealing with too many sick passengers. He confirmed what we'd suspected. Staphylococcal food poisoning from the cream-filled pastries. Staphylococcus aureus bacteria, he explained, found in the pastries and traced to the pastry cooks. Contaminated hands, improper temperature control, the bacteria produced toxins that made you sick. How long? I asked. How long until we're better? Symptoms usually last 24 to 48 hours, he said. You'll be weak for a few days after. Dehydration is the main concern. He left us more electrolyte drinks and anti-nausea medication. Nothing else he could do. No antibiotics work on this type of poisoning. You just have to wait for the toxins to clear your system. We missed 3 full days of our 7-day vacation. 3 days confined to a cabin the size of most people's bathrooms, taking turns being sick, unable to enjoy any of what we'd saved 2 years to afford. The pools, the shore excursions, the entertainment. All of it happened without us while we suffered in quarantine. When we were finally cleared to leave the cabin, we looked like refugees. All of us had lost weight from 3 days of not eating. The girls were pale and weak. Susan could barely walk without my support. We emerged to find the ship's staff had deep cleaned our cabin and replaced all the linens. But nothing could erase what we'd experienced there. The cruise line offered us $500 in compensation. $500 for a vacation that cost us $4,000. $500 for 3 days of misery, humiliation, and sickness. The representative who delivered the news looked embarrassed but offered nothing more. Later, I learned the investigation revealed things that made me furious. The ship had known about hygiene problems in the pastry kitchen. Cooks had been preparing food with infected hands. Temperature controls were inadequate. Raw ingredients had been stored improperly. Every violation of food safety that you can imagine, they'd committed. And they'd done nothing until 200 passengers got sick simultaneously. This was, according to medical literature I found later, one of the first well-documented staphylococcal food poisoning outbreaks on a cruise ship. We were part of a historic case study. Lucky us. Madison hasn't eaten dessert since that cruise. 14 months later, she still can't look at pastries without feeling nauseated. Emily gets anxious in small bathrooms. Susan refuses to even discuss taking another cruise. And me? I filed a complaint, joined a class action lawsuit with other affected passengers, and watched as the cruise line settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements for anyone who'd accept them. We don't talk about the cruise much as a family. When friends ask about it, we say it was fine and change the subject. But sometimes I catch Susan or one of the girls with a distant look, and I know they're remembering that tiny bathroom, the humiliation, the pain, the sound of all four of us sick simultaneously while the cruise ship sailed on and other passengers enjoyed their paradise vacation. 2 years of saving for 3 days of hell. That's what our dream family vacation became. And the worst part? The cruise line is still operating, still serving cream-filled pastries, still putting profits over safety. And somewhere right now, another family is probably boarding one of their ships, excited for their dream vacation, with no idea what they're risking every time they eat something from the ship's kitchen. I'm an accountant. I calculate risks for a living. But I never calculated this one. I never imagined that the all-inclusive dining we'd been so excited about could poison my entire family and turn our dream vacation into a nightmare we'll carry forever. The memory that haunts me most? Madison sobbing from dehydration, too weak to lift her head, begging me to make it stop. And knowing I couldn't. Knowing I'd saved for 2 years to bring her here. Knowing I'd failed to protect her from something as simple as contaminated dessert. That's the real cost, not the $4,000 or the 3 lost days. The cost is seeing my daughters traumatized by something that should never have happened. Something that was entirely preventable if the cruise line had followed basic food safety protocols. They offered us a 25% discount on a future cruise, as if we'd ever step foot on one of their ships again. My name is Rosalina, and before you judge me as a careless mother, understand this. I assess risk professionally. I'm 45, work in human resources in Pennsylvania, and I've spent 20 years spotting red flags in people. I interview candidates, identify liars, protect my company from dangerous hires. None of that expertise mattered when 3 teenage boys drugged my 14-year-old daughter and hid her unconscious body in a cargo hold for 7 hours. 14 is such a vulnerable age. Old enough to crave independence, young enough to be impossibly naive. Lizzie had been pulling away from her father David and me that year, typical teenage rebellion. Eye rolls at family dinners, preferring texts to conversations. We'd become embarrassing just by existing. David suggested a cruise. Forced family time with built-in independence through the teen center. The perfect compromise. Lizzie was actually excited. She researched teen programs, picked activities, clutched the ship's schedule on embarkation day like a treasure map. David and I felt hopeful. Maybe this would reconnect us. The first 3 days worked perfectly. Lizzie attended teen activities enthusiastically. Movie nights, pool competitions, karaoke. She'd return to our cabin chattering about kids she'd met, showing photos of new friends. David and I had our own fun. Couples massages, romantic dinners, adult pool lounging. We checked in with Lizzie regularly, but gave her space. She was happy. We were happy. Day 4, Thursday afternoon around 2:30 p.m., Lizzie asked permission to hang out at the teen cafe. A group was meeting at 3 p.m. for smoothies and conversation. Could she go? We said yes with one simple rule. Text us by 6 p.m. Just check in. She agreed cheerfully and left with her phone and room key, calling that she loved us. David and I spent the afternoon reading on deck loungers. Paradise, complete paradise, while our nightmare was already beginning below deck. 6 p.m. came. No text. I messaged, "Time to check in, sweetie." No response. 10 minutes passed. I called. Voicemail. David suggested she'd lost track of time, but maternal instinct screamed something was wrong. By 6:30 p.m., we were at the teen center. The staff member, Melissa, checked her computer. Lizzie signed in at 3:15 p.m. and out at 3:47 p.m., left with friends. That stomach-drop feeling when rationality and panic collide. I felt it viscerally then. We searched everywhere, every pool, restaurant, lounge, theater. Asked staff about a 14-year-old girl, brown hair, 5'4", pink cover-up. Nobody remembered seeing her. She'd vanished on a ship carrying thousands. By 7 p.m., we reported to ship security. The officer behind the desk, older man, gray hair, bored expression, barely looked up. "Your daughter is how old?" 14. "You gave her permission to be alone at the teen center?" "Yes, but she was supposed to check in. It's been an hour. We need help." He sighed like we were inconveniencing him. "Teenagers lose track of time. She'll show up when she's hungry." David's voice went hard. "We've searched for over an hour. Help us find her, now. Go back to your cabin. She'll turn up." We refused to leave. For 2 hours, we stood there while they made half-hearted calls. David grew angrier. I oscillated between terror and rage. Where was my baby? Why weren't they taking this seriously? At 9 p.m., 6 hours after Lizzie left, I was nearly hysterical. "My daughter has been missing for 6 hours. Why aren't you searching every inch of this ship?" Finally, they agreed to review CCTV. We watched footage from the teen cafe, time-stamped 3:20 p.m. There was Lizzie, sitting with 3 boys, around 16 or 17, smiling, animated. One boy brought her iced tea. She thanked him, drank it. They talked. Everything looked normal, safe. Then at 3:42 p.m., Lizzie stood and swayed like she was dizzy. She grabbed the table. One boy immediately stood, put his arm around her waist. The others stood too. They were supporting her. She wasn't walking right. Her head drooped forward. "Where are they taking her?" I demanded, gripping the desk until my knuckles went white. Different camera. Elevator, deck 5, 3:48 p.m. Lizzie between 2 boys, literally held up, head hanging, feet dragging, nearly unconscious. The third boy pressed the elevator button, checking over his shoulder like watching for witnesses. "Where does that go?" David's voice shook. "Multiple decks. I'll track where they exited." But he couldn't. Claimed blind spots in camera coverage. They entered on deck 5, but there was no footage of them exiting anywhere. Lost. We'd lost my unconscious daughter and 3 boys in this massive ship's guts. How does a cruise ship with thousands of people not have complete camera coverage? How do 3 boys carry an incapacitated girl through corridors and nobody notices? Nobody stops them? Nobody questions it? "Every crew member needs to search," I said. "Make a ship-wide announcement. We're handling this quietly to avoid panic. I don't care about panic. Find my daughter." At 10:30 p.m., 7.5 hours after Lizzie disappeared, a young crew member burst in, breathing hard. He spoke rapid Tagalog to the head security guard, whose expression shifted. He turned to us. "We've located your daughter. She's being brought up now." Relief and terror hit simultaneously. "Where? Is she hurt? Where are the boys? She was found in a storage area. She's safe. What storage area? What deck? Who found her? Where are those boys? He ignored me and spoke into his radio. 5 agonizing minutes passed. Then a crew member led Lizzie in. I rushed to her and nearly collapsed. Her clothes were damp, hair wet. She could barely stand. The crew member supported most of her weight. Eyes unfocused, pupils huge and black. When I pulled her into my arms, she didn't hug back, just leaned against me like a rag doll, barely conscious. Lizzie, what happened? Where were you? She mumbled, incoherently, couldn't form sentences, didn't seem to recognize us. Medical, now, I said. We half-carried her to the ship's medical center. The doctor examined her, checked vitals, shined a light in her eyes, asked questions she couldn't answer. Lizzie, can you hear me? Do you know where you are? She blinked slowly. Ship? Are we... ship? Do you remember drinking anything this afternoon? Tea? Her voice slurred. Someone... tea? Tasted weird. What happened after you drank it? She started crying, slow, confused tears. Don't know. Don't remember. Mom, where was I? The doctor looked at us with an expression I'll never forget. I believe she was drugged. Symptoms consistent with a sedative, possibly rohypnol. But without toxicology testing, I can't confirm what substance. Then test her, right now. We don't have those capabilities. We'd need a hospital on shore. We begged for emergency evacuation. They refused. Her vitals were stable, they said, not in immediate danger. Whatever she'd been given was wearing off. She just needed rest and fluids. Over the next hours, Lizzie became more lucid but couldn't remember anything from 3:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. 7 hours, erased, gone. She remembered the teen cafe. A blonde boy bringing iced tea because she'd mentioned being thirsty. It tasting slightly bitter, but drinking it anyway to be polite. Feeling suddenly exhausted and dizzy. Then nothing until waking in medical with us hovering over her. Where was I? She kept asking, increasingly distressed. Mom, where was I? What happened? I had no answers. Just rage and terror. I returned to security demanding answers. David stayed with Lizzie, who was crying uncontrollably. The head officer was even more evasive. Your daughter was found in a storage cubbyhole on Deck 2 cargo area. She's safe. That's what matters. What storage area? How did she get there? How would anyone know about it? We don't know specifics. You have her on camera with 3 boys. Your doctor said she was drugged. Where are they? I want them arrested. We've handled this appropriately. Handled it? My daughter was drugged and hidden for 7 hours, and you've handled it? Where are they? That's confidential as part of our investigation. What investigation? You didn't even look until I forced you. A younger security guard had watched our exchange. As I left, furious and crying, he followed me to the corridor. He looked nervous, checking over his shoulder before speaking quietly. Ma'am, I'm really glad your daughter's okay. Glad you got her back. Something in his emphasis on got her back made my blood freeze. What do you mean? He met my eyes briefly. I know what happened. You know what happened. Just be grateful she's safe. Some families aren't so lucky. He walked away quickly. I stood there trembling, understanding. This wasn't the first time. This was a pattern. A known danger they'd done nothing to prevent. Next morning, I saw the head security, Ed, guard laughing casually with 3 teenage boys in the atrium. I recognized them from the footage. Same faces, same boys who drugged my daughter. I started toward them. David grabbed my arm. Don't. We need to protect Lizzie. He was right. But those boys were free, walking around laughing while my daughter lay traumatized in our cabin. We demanded to see the captain, filed formal complaints, documented everything. The cruise line's response? We were prohibited from approaching those boys. For Lizzie's privacy and safety. The head security guard actually called Lizzie a little slut the next day. Said it to our faces, implied she'd asked for it. David nearly attacked him. We finished the cruise trapped at sea. Watched Lizzie constantly. She didn't want to leave our cabin anyway. Terrified. Crying, jumping at sounds, asking unanswerable questions. The ship never let us see where she was found. Never explained how teenagers would know about hidden cargo cubbyholes. Never provided footage from that area. Claimed no cameras in crew zones. I know what almost happened. I'm trained to recognize trafficking patterns, assault indicators, predatory behavior. Those boys drugged my daughter with clear intent. Took her unconscious to a place without cameras or witnesses. That guard's comment, "Glad you got her back," suggested sometimes girls don't come back. The cruise line never contacted us after disembarkation. No follow-up, no explanation. We filed a lawsuit that failed. Maritime law protections, jurisdiction issues, no physical evidence. Without toxicology proving drugs or footage showing what happened, we had no case. Lizzie is 16 now, 2 years later. She doesn't remember those 7 hours, maybe the drug's effect, maybe her brain protecting her from trauma. But she has constant nightmares. Won't drink anything she didn't personally open. Panics in enclosed spaces. Therapy 3 times weekly, probably for years. And I live knowing I gave permission. Said yes. Let my daughter walk into that trap. Risk assessment professional. Mother. Failed at the most critical assessment of my life. The cruise line is still operating. Still has teen centers with inadequate supervision. Still has cargo areas without cameras. Still protects itself over children. So I'm telling this story everywhere I can. Parent forums, travel blogs, news outlets, advocacy groups. If the cruise industry won't protect our kids, parents need to know the truth. Don't let your teenager go to the teen cafe alone. Don't trust that security cameras cover everything. Don't believe the cruise line will prioritize your child over their reputation. We got Lizzie back alive. That makes us lucky. But luck isn't the same as justice. And warning other families. That's the only justice I can create from this nightmare. Consider yourself warned. My name is James, and I know what drowning feels like. Not the quick Hollywood version, the real thing. 20 hours of it. 20 hours alone in the Gulf of Mexico after falling off a cruise ship, watching the lights disappear, knowing nobody saw me go, accepting that I was probably going to die before sunrise. 29 years old, sales rep from Alabama, celebrating a promotion that suddenly meant nothing when I hit that dark water 70 feet below deck 11. I'm the guy everyone likes at parties. Outgoing, easy to talk to, never met a stranger. Built my career selling enterprise software because I connect with people naturally. When I booked that solo trip on the Carnival Valor to Mexico, being alone didn't worry me. I'd find my crew, always did. And I did. First 4 days were perfect. Met a group at the main bar, night 1, instant friends. 20-somethings and 30s from Dallas, Chicago, Seattle. We pool hopped during the day, partied at the nightclub every evening, closed down bars together. Living that vacation life where nothing matters except right now. Night 4, Thursday around 11 p.m. We'd been drinking since 8. Not stumbling drunk, but definitely past sober. The bar was packed, hot, loud. I needed air. Told my friends I'd be back in 10 and headed to deck 11. Perfect night. Warm Caribbean breeze, stars everywhere, ocean sound rushing past the hull. I walked to the railing, leaned against it, looked out at the black water. Peaceful. Just me and the endless ocean. I checked my phone, 11:17 p.m. Leaned forward to see the water directly below. Then I was falling, no time to scream, just wind and terror and darkness rushing past. I hit the water so hard it knocked me unconscious, or semi-conscious. That part's blurry. When awareness returned, I was underwater, disoriented, lungs screaming. Kicked frantically upward, broke surface gasping, choking. The ship. The ship was already so far away, moving impossibly fast. I could see its lights. Hundreds of them, warm and safe, getting smaller every second. And nobody knew. Nobody saw me fall. The ship kept going, and I was alone in pitch-black ocean. I tried screaming, couldn't get enough air. Just choked gasps. The panic that hit was primal, pure animal terror. Going to drown, and nobody would know what happened. Don't panic. The thought broke through somehow. Don't panic or you're dead right now. I forced myself to tread water. Forced my breathing to slow. Assessed situation like a client problem. Current status, alive. Wearing jeans, button down, sneakers, heavy, hard to stay afloat. Ship's lights almost gone. Faint glow, then nothing. Complete darkness. Alone. Shoes first, had to get the shoes off. Struggled with wet laces, finally kicked them off. They floated. I grabbed them, tied laces together, hung them around my neck. Slight flotation. Every bit helped. Hours passed. I have no idea how many at first. Just darkness and exhaustion and cold. The Gulf in November isn't home. Warm, maybe low 70s. Sounds warm until you're in it for hours. My core temperature dropping, shivering uncontrollably. Hypothermia setting in, then the jellyfish. Couldn't see them, just felt sudden burning stings on my arms, legs, chest. Multiple stings. Pain sharp and spreading. Kept swimming, kept moving. Movement helped with cold and hopefully scared off predators. Something with a fin circled me. I saw it cut through water maybe 6 feet away. Shark? Dolphin? No idea. Kicked violently, splashed, yelled. It disappeared. Came back twice more. Each time I kicked and splashed until it left. Used up energy I couldn't spare but had no choice. Dawn came eventually. Sunrise over endless ocean. Most beautiful and most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. Meant I'd been in water over 12 hours. Meant I could see how alone I was. Nothing but water in every direction. No ships, no land, no rescue. Dehydration was brutal. Throat so dry I could barely swallow. Knew I couldn't drink salt water, that would kill me faster. Saw a piece of bamboo floating nearby. Grabbed it, tried chewing it for moisture. Tasted terrible but gave my mouth something. The bamboo was buoyant. Helped me float while I rested. By midday, spotted something on the horizon. Oil rig maybe. Tried swimming toward it, but currents were wrong. Kept getting pulled away, exhausted, muscles cramping, jellyfish stings burning, hypothermia making me confused. Afternoon came. 14, 15, 16 hours. Lost track, started accepting I might die. Made peace with it, sort of. Thought about my family, my mom, friends. The promotion I'd been celebrating seemed stupid now. All of it stupid and meaningless. This is how I die. Alone in the ocean. They'll never find my body, never know what happened. Started hallucinating around hour 18. Thought I saw ships that weren't there. Heard voices, my body shutting down. Hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion. The end was coming. Then I heard it. Real this time. Engine sound. I forced my head up, water streaming from my eyes. Bulk carrier ship. Massive, maybe quarter mile away. I screamed, waved my arms, screamed until my throat tore. They couldn't hear me. Too far. Ship would pass and I'd die. But someone on deck saw me. Someone with binoculars. The ship slowed, changed course slightly. A crew member was pointing at me, shouting to others. Coast Guard helicopter arrived maybe 30 minutes later. I watched it approach, propeller noise the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Rescue swimmer dropped into water beside me. I tried talking but couldn't. He grabbed me, got the harness on, signaled. We lifted up. I remember looking down at the ocean that almost killed me. Remember seeing how small I was from above. Just a tiny dot in endless blue. How had anyone found me? How was I alive? Hospital in Louisiana. 2 weeks. Severe dehydration, hypothermia, countless jellyfish stings, exhaustion, possible organ damage from the cold. They said I shouldn't have survived. 20 hours is at the absolute limit of human endurance in those conditions. Most people die after 12. Back on the Carnival Valor, nobody had reported me missing until the next afternoon. My friends thought I'd gone back to my cabin, thought I was sleeping off the alcohol. The ship didn't know I was gone until Coast Guard called about rescuing me from the ocean. That's the part that still keeps me up at night. I fell off a ship carrying thousands of people, and nobody noticed for 15 hours. Statistics say only 25 to 30% of overboard situations end in rescue. Most people are never found, never recovered, just gone. I'm the exception, the miracle, the guy who everything went right for. Survived the fall, stayed conscious, kept moving, avoided major predators, got spotted by that one ship whose crew member happened to be looking at exactly the right moment. Miracle, that's what everyone calls it. Miracle survival, miracle rescue. Like God or fate or the universe decided I deserved to live. But miracles don't explain the 20 hours. Don't explain treading water until your muscles give out, then somehow treading more. Don't explain the cold that seeps so deep you can't remember what warm feels like. Don't explain watching sunrise over empty ocean and knowing you're probably seeing your last one. I have nightmares constantly. Not about falling, about the moment the ship's lights disappeared. That moment when I understood I was truly alone. When rescue went from possible to impossible. When death became not if, but when. I don't drink anymore. Can't. Every time I'm near alcohol, I see that deck railing. Feel myself leaning too far forward. Feel the fall. Severe anxiety about water now. Can't swim in pools without panicking. Ocean is completely impossible. And cruises? I'll never set foot on another cruise ship as long as I live. The statistics alone should terrify people. 2 people go overboard every month on average. Most are drunk like I was. Most are at night, like me. Most are alone on deck, like me. Most are never found. But here's what really haunts me. I'm not special. I didn't survive because I'm stronger or smarter or more deserving than the others who fell and died. I survived because a bulk carrier happened to be in the right place. Because a crew member happened to look at the right moment. Because the Coast Guard broadcast reached that ship. Because jellyfish didn't kill me. Because a shark didn't attack. Because hypothermia took 20 hours instead of 12 to shut me down. Luck, just luck. And luck runs out. So when people call me Miracle Boy, when they want to hear the inspiring survival story, I tell them the truth. I got lucky, that's it. The ocean didn't give me life. It just failed to take it before someone found me. And if you're planning a cruise, don't drink and go on deck alone at night. Don't lean over railings to take photos. Don't assume someone will notice if you fall. Because the ocean doesn't care about your promotion or your vacation or your family waiting at home. The ocean just waits. And most of the time, the ocean wins. I'm James. I fell off a cruise ship and lived to tell about it. But survival doesn't mean victory. It just means I have 20 hours of drowning etched into my memory forever. And every night when I close my eyes, I'm back in that black water watching the lights disappear. My name is Michael, and I escaped a pandemic death trap by pure luck and paranoia. 37 years old, software engineer from Seattle. And in March 2020, I boarded a Caribbean cruise with 3,700 other passengers just as COVID-19 started spreading globally. While everyone else partied in packed bars and theaters, I researched infection rates on my phone and realized I was trapped on what an infectious disease expert called an accelerator and inevitable disaster. I got off that ship hours before they locked it down. Others weren't so lucky. Solo travel suited my personality. Chronic workaholic, burned out from coding 14-hour days, taking my first real vacation in 3 years. No coordinating with others, no compromising on activities. Just me, an interior cabin, and 7 days of Caribbean sunshine. The ship was massive. 16 decks, multiple restaurants, pools, theaters, bars. A floating resort with thousands of strangers. Departed Miami on March 5th, 2020. The news out of China and Italy was concerning but felt distant. The cruise line assured passengers they'd implemented enhanced cleaning protocols. Hand sanitizer stations everywhere. Signs encouraging hand washing. Everything felt under control. First 3 days were exactly what I'd hoped for. Slept late, ate buffet breakfasts, spent afternoons by the pool reading novels I'd been meaning to finish. Evenings at various bars, making casual conversation with other travelers. Nobody seemed worried. The vibe was party mode. People celebrating, dancing, drinking, touching everything. Closely packed crowds everywhere. Day 4, March 9th. I started paying attention to news reports on my phone. The virus was spreading faster than initially thought. Cases appearing in multiple countries, Italy going into lockdown, the WHO discussing whether to declare it a pandemic. And cruise ships, particularly cruise ships, were becoming hotspots. The Diamond Princess in Japan had hundreds of infected passengers quarantined in their cabins for weeks. I looked around the ship that afternoon with new eyes. The pool deck where hundreds of bodies pressed together in the water. The buffet where people handled the same serving spoons. The elevator buttons everyone touched. The theater where passengers sat shoulder to shoulder watching shows. The bars where strangers shared tables, talking loudly, breathing the same recycled air. This wasn't a vacation. This was a floating petri dish. I called an infectious disease expert I'd interviewed years ago for a tech health app project. Explained the situation. I was on a cruise ship with thousands of passengers. COVID-19 was spreading. What should I do? His response chilled me. Get off that ship immediately. Cruise ships are accelerators for pandemics. The ventilation systems recirculate air. Passengers share confined spaces. The virus spreads exponentially in that environment. If there's even one infected person on board, and statistically there probably is, the entire ship will be infected within days. Get off. Today, if possible. I hung up and felt my chest tighten. We were scheduled to dock at an island the next morning. I could get off there, book a flight home. But that meant abandoning the cruise early, losing money on the vacation, looking paranoid. Then I looked at the live band playing to a packed crowd in the atrium. Hundreds of people dancing, singing, shouting to be heard over the music. Breathing on each other. Touching, sweating, nobody wearing masks, nobody distancing. Just pure, oblivious celebration while a pandemic spread globally. I went to my cabin and booked a flight from tomorrow's port to Miami, then Miami to Seattle. $300 for tickets I might not need if I was overreacting. But the expert's words kept echoing. Get off that ship. I tried warning the friends I'd made on board. Casual acquaintances from the pool and bars. Showed them news articles about cruise ship outbreaks, explained what the infectious disease expert had said. They thanked me, but said they felt safe. The cruise line was taking precautions. They'd come this far, might as well enjoy the vacation. Maybe I was being paranoid. That night I couldn't sleep. Stayed on the main deck outdoors, trying to maintain 6 feet from other passengers, though that concept wasn't widely understood yet. Below me, through the windows, I could see parties continuing. People living their best lives while I stood alone in the wind, feeling like the crazy person. Next morning, March 10th, we docked at St. Thomas. I went to the front desk to officially disembark. The crew member saw my name on the list and immediately said, "Mr. Dover, I've been looking for you. The cruise has been canceled. COVID-19 is spreading. We're returning to Miami. The effects are hard on all of us." My stomach dropped. Canceled. It was really happening. "But I have a flight off the island today," I said, showing my ticket. Relief crossed her face. "Then you should go immediately. Get your paperwork processed and leave." The line at reception was enormous. Hundreds of passengers trying to disembark, get information, arrange transportation. I stood in that crowd for 2 hours, hyper-aware of every cough, every sneeze, every breath around me. People pressing close. No concept of distance. I held my breath as much as possible, turned my face away, touched nothing. Later, I learned the cruise line had restricted Wi-Fi access to only passengers who'd already booked flights home. The others, trapped on the ship without communication to families, unable to research options, were essentially captive. They disconnected people deliberately, controlled information, prevented panic that might have saved lives. When I finally reached the front desk, the crew member looked exhausted. I showed my flight confirmation. She processed my disembarkation papers quickly, stamped everything, handed them over. "Would you like to visit the buffet before you leave?" she asked. I stared at her. The buffet? The place where hundreds would touch the same serving spoons, breathe the same air, spread whatever pathogens were circulating. "No, I need to leave now." She gave me a knowing look. She understood. She felt it too, the danger of staying. But she was crew. She couldn't leave. She'd go back to Miami on this infected ship and hope she didn't get sick. I grabbed my bag and ran to the disembarkation area. Physically ran, dodging slow-moving passengers, desperate to get off before they changed their minds. Reached the gangway, stepped onto St. Thomas soil, left that ship behind. The relief was overwhelming. I was off. I was safe. I'd escaped. The flight to Miami was half empty. The flight to Seattle even emptier. People were starting to understand, starting to avoid travel, starting to panic. Within days, I learned what happened to that ship and others like it. The Diamond Princess in Japan had over 700 infected passengers out of 3,700, exactly the size of the ship I'd been on. They were quarantined in their cabins for 14 days. 14 days breathing recycled air, eating food delivered by potentially infected crew, unable to leave windowless interior rooms. Some died. Many developed lasting health complications. Other cruise ships were refused port entry, left floating at sea with sick passengers and nowhere to dock. Crew members trapped for months, passengers dying on board. I'd escaped by hours. Hours. If I hadn't called that expert, hadn't booked that flight, hadn't insisted on leaving immediately, I'd have been trapped. Quarantined, exposed. The pandemic changed everything for everyone. But for me, it started on that cruise ship. Started with the realization that paradise can become prison in minutes. Started with understanding that sometimes paranoia isn't mental illness. It's survival instinct. I developed severe anxiety about crowds after that. About confined spaces. About being trapped anywhere without an exit. Can't ride subways without panicking. Can't attend concerts. Can't go into packed restaurants. My therapist says it's PTSD from those 2 hours standing in that disembarkation line, knowing every breath might infect me. The cruise industry tried to restart operations a year later. Implemented new protocols, vaccination requirements, enhanced ventilation, promised it was safe now. I'll never believe them, because I know what they did in March 2020. How they restricted Wi-Fi to control passengers, how they prioritized profits over safety, how they sent ships out even as the pandemic spread, gambling with thousands of lives. My work break became a nightmare escape from a floating pandemic incubator. And the people I'd tried to warn, the ones who said I was overreacting, who stayed on board to enjoy their vacation. Some of them got COVID. Some were hospitalized. Some developed long COVID symptoms that persist years later. I was lucky, paranoid and lucky. And that combination saved my life. These 10 cruise ship horror stories are real. They happen to real people on real voyages. The ocean holds beauty and terror in equal measure. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe to Mr. Nightveil for more true horror content that will make you think twice before booking your next vacation. Hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay safe out there.